Shalom, salam. This is a quick overview of the Hispanic and Latino religious and church history, right? Particularly from Spain, right? During the, I'm gonna try to say 1300s. I'm gonna try to do a quick overview, a general quick overview, right? Yesterday I tried to do this live stream during Yom Kippur, uh, but it wasn't planned. I just had a lot of things going on. So what granted me to do this in the Spanish channel, right? Well, first of all, is first to keep the Chicano and other English-speaking Hispanic and Latino people grounded in their church history and religious history, right? So I'm gonna be a super quick overview. I'm not gonna get into every single detail, which I would want to do that. I think I'm gonna make two videos regarding this. This is just what the first part regarding it, right? So obviously, as you start in 1492, right? I was gonna say 1300s, but no, 1492 is a pretty nice place to start, right? In that time, right, the crowns of Castile and Aragon are intermarried, right? We just know Catholics exist, but during that time, right, the seat of Rome, right, the Pope is also to some going something, and he's destroying the other rites, the other Catholic rites, right? So the Muso Arabic rite, which was once popular throughout different parts of Spain, is contained today in Toledo and in other parts, and it's more of a ceremonial rite in these days. I may be just simplifying this aspect because there's a lot of history that goes with the rites of this in the Dominican order. This is the Catholic history, right? This is 1492, a pretty good space to spot to start, right? Right now, as the Catholic Church is a really big institution, uh, you have these other orders that are right there competing amongst each other, and they're also competing over the certain rites, right? The Ambrosian rite, the Byzantine rite, right? Um, During this time, right, the Pope is exerting as much as authority as he can, right, to keep these rights and make the Roman rite, the Western rite, the dominant rite to have unity in the Western Church, right? The Eastern churches are faced with something similar. The Eastern autocephalous Catholic churches, but it's not important for us. It's only important for us in Morocco, which Morocco also having today only the Roman rite as its majority rite. Now, 1492 is still important, right? Because we're gonna also touch base in Islam and Judaism, right? So, when the crowns of Castile and Aragon unite, there is a mandate for the Moros or the Moriscos, who are who today we know as Muslim converts to Christianity, right? They're either forced to convert to Christianity and they keep themselves as that, right? That is the proper term, Moro or Morisco. It also refers to the Moorish community that was once held the control up in Andalus. And with that, you also have, well, the more widely known and widely studied Conversos, right? So in 1492, right, a lot of these Conversos are out there going out and basically both the Muslims and the Jewish communities or Hebraic communities are choosing to become Christian, particularly Catholic, because the Protestant Reformation hasn't happened yet, right? And when this happens, right, the they are either granted the right to become lords of their own right, of their own lands, and this is still prior to to the conquest of colonization of the Americas, right? So you can say it's like two or so this is a gradual process that started during the 1300s and kind of ended around the 16 or 1700s. And even that is a generous amount of time, given how if any of you are a philologist, a linguist, and have studied Muso Arabic or Al Camiado or Jaquetia or also Ladino, you can tell that the those of us that speak or understand Spanish, there's a lot of nuances. You can you can consider it as a form of dialectal change within it, within general Spanish. Let's say a Colombian speaker or a Mexican speaker can generally understand majority of Mozo Árabe or Jaquetia. Now, Al Camiado is the written format of Spanish uh, in Arabic lettering, right? And Al Camiado has survived today through some interesting poems. And the poems are ambiguous enough where you cannot tell if they are Christian in origin, Muslim in origin, or even Jewish in origin, because it was the majority common language at the time, right? Sometimes it represents all three. As the most widely known poem today is known as El Poema de Yusuf. El Poema de Yusuf is those who are acquainted with the what I'm saying is the poem of Joseph, right? It's the widest known, and then there's another known poem that also has the. It's not a poem. It's just uh, one of the later Al Cambiado letters is urging to a lot of its people to remain Muslim during the Catholic Inquisition, right, of the other peoples. This is generally, you know, I'm gonna say like most historians would know this. If you're not a historian, then yeah, I can see how it's like, oh, okay, little niche, little different. Now, as time goes by, and you get into the first Protestant during the magisterial Reformation, right? Because there's two Reformations. You have the Radical Reformation and the Magisterial Reformation. Magisterial Reformation usually refers to the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, the Anglicans, right? These high episcopate churches. So during this time, right, there is a sizable community of Spanish-speaking proto-Protestant members, right? Or some of them end up becoming Presbyterians. I don't remember the names out of the top of my head. I know they're important here. I know their last names, de Reina y de Valera. These two last names are important for those that know the Spanish-speaking Bible edition, which today is the Reina Valera 1960. I'll explain a little more on it as to why it's important. And it's a really unique Bible translation amongst the European languages. So let's keep that in mind. these scholars, right, are unique in the fact that they're Catholic scholars becoming Protestant. Most likely, what you would find about the Protestant Reformation is how the Catholic Dominican order basically stopped the Protestant Reformation from happening in Spain. But it's a very, very niche thing to know. Like, yeah, you'll get the idea, but it's a lot more history that goes behind it. Now, the rest of what is important to know is that during this time, right, the first edition of the Bible, of well, of the Spanish edition Bible, is found in Ladino. It is commissioned for a wealthy converso woman who is running away, or not running away, but she is a noblewoman, right? It's commissioned for her, and it's a direct translation from the Masoretic text uh, by the by a respected uh, member of the rabbinic community, right? So she could get a hang of her coming back into mainstream Judaism without her being defiled in a certain sense, right? So this is a direct word for word translation. This first edition of the Spanish Bible, which does not include the New Testament, is called the Ferrera Bible, right? Well, that's part one of this, how the Reina Valera gets started. Then the those same people, well, not those same people, but those first Spanish-speaking Protestants, right, of the Magisterial Reformation, who some also joined the Radical Reformation, aka the Anabaptist. Mind you, I'm holding back who these people are. Some of them were conversos in origin. A lot of them were conversos in origin. They were well educated, not only in Arabic, but also in the Espanol of the time and Latin. So the converso community is unique in this regard of, okay, being able to have a lot of different languages happening at that specific time and moment. And today, those descendants, not so much, right? Now, the first Ferrera Bible gets turned into La Biblia del Oso, which is the first edition that is commissioned for the first proto-Protestant community during, I think, during 1511, which is, I think, yeah, way earlier than you would have expected than the Protestant Reformation. I think I may be wrong, but it's based with the Ferrara Bible in mind, and the New Testament has enough of the Textus Receptus of Erasmus, and as the time goes on, you get you get multiple renditions of the Reina Valera Bible today, and today the current Reina Valera is an amalgamation of uh, different biblical codices made to look as a more modern rendition and using the language. Why the 1960 being the majority, despite having the 2011, where even Spanish-speaking Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and other denominations contributed. It is the most neutral Spanish-speaking language that you have. It doesn't update the language as much, since there are different dialects and some more conservative than others that are important to know. and it's just the most neutral that exists as of now, right? Maybe they'll change it to the 2011 in 50 years, right? But it's just the most abundant right now. So that's the biblical discourse of to the so basically saying, okay, the proto Protestants didn't exactly fail. It is the most abundant form of the Spanish speaking Bible. And I don't think Catholics are stuck with the same unanimity, since a lot of Spanish speaking Catholics are still very much leaning into the Roman Rite. Now, I didn't say, okay, that they disappeared, because they do disappear for a while, right? Because some of these members of the proto Protestants enter and become the Huguenots, so they become and enter the Anabaptist movement or the early Baptist movements, right? And it's nothing wrong with that. It just makes it a little wonky, a little weird. There's no true unity in Europe, right? This is still Europe. This is still North Africa, and I've just touched base with Catholics and the early Protestant Spanish-speaking communities, right? Now, the Muslim community kind of disappears. It's the Spanish-speaking community, since I already touched base with them, they essentially go in Morocco. Now we fast forward a few hundred years during the 1980s. La Sociedad Islámica Moravitun is the first major revival of Islamic uh, of like Islamic uh, community in the Spanish speaking world, and it is somewhat successful with certain indigenous communities in the United in not the United States, in Mexico, and yeah, but this happened simply because during the early 1900s, throughout Latin America, you have a large Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, and Egyptian diaspora entering to these countries, and there is no unity amongst them. Some of them just abandon the Islamic faith and just become Christian or secular, or it's just there. It varies with community from community, right? Because this there are so many groups of people that I can talk about. That's why I'm trying to keep it brief, right? So what keeps what keeps going on next, right? So they enter this Mexican native tribe is the one that is currently the most adherent in Islamic, uh, like Spanish speaking world. They understand it through Spanish, but they also translate it back into their native languages, right? Because it's a Spanish Moroccan Persian person that goes and brings Islam into the native population of Mexico. Um, and I think it is in the Caribbean too, where they also enter, like in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. But they're just the most noticeable community that you can think of once you are in there. Now, fast forward a few years, you have the first Spanish majority community known as Islam in Spanish, or obviously in Spanish as Islam in Español. Uh, Mind you, they're based in Houston, Texas, with a few of other centers in Dallas, and they have some help here and there. the masjid is, from what I've heard, has based itself off the Cathedral of Cordoba to make a similar layout. It is a nice looking building, and it got remodeled, and it's basically majority Sunni Islam, right? Most of these that I'm talking about are like simple, forward Sunni Islam with no allegiance to fiqh or jurisprudence. Just simple, and that's about it. As simplified as I can be, right? Now, yeah, I can grant you, I can talk about the Druze of Venezuela and the other Shia communities through the Lebanese diaspora that exist in Coahuila and like Colombia, but they're more unique to the Arab identity right now. Well, and to the large Lebanese diaspora that exists. But just keep in mind that there are some Spanish-speaking Shias. They're just not the majority. The majority is basically Sunnis. Maybe a few Alawis and Alevis here and there. That is just the Islamic movement. I've tried to simplify that as much as I could. I think that's the most simplified that I'll get with Islam. Now, with Judaism, now that's a whole different beast because I'm gonna add the Messianic movement and the Hebrew Roots movement here together as one. I I think I'm pretty sure that whoever, the Orthodox members will be a little bit, triggered, but I'll explain why. I'll add them together. But it's a really unique historical thing that is happening as of right now with Judaism in the Spanish-speaking world, right? I should have added a little bit more of historical context with each one, but I think I did add some historical context with the Islamic one context. Now, with the Judaic frame, a lot of the early uh, conquistadores were relatives or were members of the first conversos from Judaism into Catholicism. Whether they believe or practice Judaism openly or closed is up to debate, since not a lot of Judaica has been found, and it's very likely that you will only find at best what, a kedusha plate and a hafdalah cup. That's about it, because when you're trying to hide a Hebraic or Jewish identity, you can take away the kippah, you can take away everything, but the essentials is, can you keep Shabbat, right? So this means that there would be very few tefillin, very few like strictly or like Judaic practices without people knowing. And you can keep it with simply just a plate and a cup. That is all I can basically summarize it to. A plate and a cup is essentially the 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 essentials of Judaism, right? With Melaveh Malka, which means to accompany the queen in Hebrew. But if you're gonna be pedantic about the language, right? In Aramaic, Melaveh Malka literally means to accompany the king, and yeah, so that's as simple as I can be there. So during 15 something, 1526 or 1548. It's a time frame of that time. It's after the 1520s, during the 1500s, right? Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca comes with that. It's one of those early proto conversos. There is very few. There is very few traces to know if he maintained Judaism as his personal practice or was a hardcore Catholic. There is hardly any solid evidence for one or the other. We just know that he is a member of the Converso community, but he is the first one to enter into what today is known Florida and later Galveston, Texas, right? Galveston, Texas is also important with the Hebraic community. A little bit later, I'll explain it later, like in 2 minutes from now. But what does this mean, right? A lot of the early Spanish nobility in Mexico, because these are still Españoles, right? Mostly men were coming here and taking indigenous wives. Some of them did bring their families and their European relatives from all the way from Toledo, Cordoba, Zaragoza, um, or even Portugal, or even Italy, right? Since the kingdom of the Two Sicilies was at one point a part of the Spanish crown, under the Spanish crown, and even Portugal, right? So these different families of converso origin, right? So you have very few traces of what you could consider right, traces of Judaism left all over, uh, all over what it could be, as far north as Wyoming, as far south as La Tierra del Fuego, right? So Wyoming would be the furthest north where the Spanish would have had certain colonies already posted, right? You could also argue in Washington, but it wasn't permanent as the Wyoming territory, as the certain part of within the Wyoming area, as it was part of the as the Virreinato de Nueva España, right? So simple as that. So you have inscriptions in Hebrew, or like Los Lagunas stone, which is found in New Mexico. It's a very neat and very nice set of Ten Commandments, and mind you, all three major Abrahamic movements, major Abrahamic faiths, keep it. They keep the Ten Commandments, but because it's written in Hebrew and in Greek, now there's some question behind it, right? Now I'm going to interject here a little bit. I personally ascribe to the Islamic revisionist narrative, and thus part of it is okay. The Al-Sabiun, meaning the Sabians, I can see that they're like Hebrew Christians. Now there's more within it. It's personal interjection, right? Now coming back into history, right? So you have those members in there, right? Being there, right? But a the Sephardic community doesn't show up in the Americas again, like like hardcore, like you can solidify this are Sephardic only until the United States and the British Crown appear during the colonial era. A lot of these are the first like Orthodox Jewish synagogues. They're found in what, Maryland, Massachusetts, and yes, they speak like Ladino and a little bit of like that, but it's more of a semi-liturgical language at now, with English being their predominant language, right? So yeah, you could understand them, but if I were to talk with them, they'll struggle it. They'll struggle a bit. Like I'll understand them easy. They wouldn't understand me. So that's about it in that aspect. Now, that was during the 1700s in the United States. So quick, easy part of history, right? That's, and then what else is next up? You have the the Hebrew Christians and the various other like Unitarian Hebraic movements that are far more lenient in Judaism, such as the Shembotask, which are now defunct, but and the Subotniks, right? Now, during the 1890s and the early 1900s, Galveston, Texas was a major port city where a lot of the Hebraic and Jewish communities entered, right? And they moved westward from there all the way to California and what is today, what, Arizona and Washington. So the very first communities, right? Uh, the Galveston community is somewhat there, and a little bit higher up north, you have it in Houston, right? While it's not a significant population such as LA or Los Angeles, it's there, right? It's a significant population. Why would I interject? Why would I put the Hebrew roots and the Messianic community together as one in here? Well, that's because a lot of them are uh, oh, were influenced by different streams of Judaism, right? Of like mainstream Judaism, and the Spanish-speaking community has a really unique stance as of right now, right? Do I agree with everything personally? No. I've seen uh, what you would call modern Orthodox rabbis entered Messianic Spanish-speaking synagogues, um, just as long as certain criterion are met. The Hebrew root things is a little iffier. I like the vibe. I've seen it, and they know of each other together. So they all knowing of each other isn't as bad as you think. They help each other with different aspects, such as when they're having a huge like community seder. Like, okay, I'll bring wine. I've met some of them, really nice people, and from this aspect, right, some of these people from the Messianic communities or Hebrew roots may or may not convert into Orthodox streams of Judaism as in later in life, or their children. I'll also add the Hebrew Israelites here, since the Hebrew Israelite community has always, in the beginning, has had a large Afro Caribbean and thus a significant Spanish speaking portion of their communities being in there and influenced by Spanish speaking stuff, right? And the more, what do you could say, the more Judaic, the more Hebrew Israelites, they've adopted Sephardic customs. And they've essentially made it like a mixed minag from the Sephardic origin, right? That's it's simple now. Oof. With the Christian community, it's gonna be tougher, a lot more iffy, and like uh, way more way more like different. Like everyone's gonna disagree. So I think I'll end it right here. But I'll tag the people uh, I'll tag a few people who are curious of like okay the Hispanic religious movements. I'll explain later why in the second one. Because the Christian one will be way too much history, too much stuff. I try to condense it, and then I made it to 35 minutes. Well, Baruch Hashem, and may y'all have a blessed day.